Welcome back to the Veal Echo. Tonight we begin a chilling journey into the life of Edmund Kemper, a man whose towering presence and cold demeanor would one day shake the nation. To truly understand how such darkness was born, we must go back to his beginnings. Picture a quiet 1950s California neighborhood, tree-lined streets, children laughing, and the hum of vintage cars. Among them was a boy who seemed ordinary, yet even then there was something unsettling about him. Young Edmund Kemper, taller than most children his age, stood apart, aloof, detached, often watching from the sidelines. His eyes carried a distance, an emptiness, even when holding something as simple as a toy. But behind the seemingly peaceful suburban facade, his world was far from normal. Much of his childhood was spent in the basement of his family's home, isolated from his siblings and cut off from warmth. The dim bulb above his small bed cast long shadows against the walls, shadows that mirrored the loneliness growing inside him. It was here in that cold confinement that his thoughts began to twist and darken. As he grew older, Edmund's towering size became impossible to ignore. By his teenage years, he loomed over classmates, his presence both awkward and intimidating. His glasses framed a stare that seemed to pierce right through people, making others uneasy. Teachers and peers couldn't quite place what it was about him, but they knew something felt off. This unease wasn't just sensed by strangers. At home, tensions escalated. Arguments with his mother became frequent, her harsh words carving deeper into his fragile psyche. Unable to find belonging, Edmund's frustrations only festered. When he was brought into contact with law enforcement as a young man, officers saw not just a troubled teenager but someone carrying darkness beyond his years. Their interrogation rooms, cold and lined with files, held a boy who barely flinched at authority, already detached from a world he felt alien to. Eventually, he found himself within the walls of a psychiatric hospital. The sterile rooms, white coats, and endless questions could not peel back the layers of his mind. Even as doctors scribbled notes and debated his condition, Edmund learned how to mask his true self. He became a student of human behavior, observing, analyzing, and adapting. To the doctors, he appeared cooperative, even intelligent. But beneath that surface, his thoughts grew more disturbing, more calculated. The roads of California in the 1960s and early 70s were dotted with students and hitchhikers, an era of freedom and movement. For most, these highways represented opportunity. But for Edmund Kemper, they would soon become hunting grounds. His calm exterior allowed him to blend seamlessly into the world. The story now moves into the early 1970s, a time when California's highways buzzed with youthful freedom. College students lined the roads, backpacks slung over their shoulders, thumbs pointed skyward in search of a ride. For most, hitchhiking was a symbol of adventure. But for those who crossed paths with Edmund Kemper, it became a journey into darkness. Kemper, now a young man in his 20s, stood out not just for his staggering 6'9" frame but for the unsettling calm he carried. Behind his large glasses, his eyes remained cold and unreadable. To strangers, he was just another driver. To those who stepped into his car, he was something else entirely. Inside the vehicle's confined space, nerves often grew tense. Young women sensed the unease, their instincts warning them, yet Kemper's soft-spoken words and disarming smile masked the predator beneath. The California highways turned into the backdrop of his sinister double life. Under the pale glow of moonlight, cars would be abandoned on remote country roads, the silence broken only by the wind. What unfolded within those moments was never fully seen by the world, but the chilling aftermath echoed in every crime scene investigators would later uncover. Kemper's actions weren't the frenzied impulses of a man out of control, they were calculated, methodical, and chillingly precise. The towering shadow he cast over his victims reflected not just his physical dominance but the terrifying control he relished. Behind closed doors, the brutality was unspeakable, yet outwardly he appeared disturbingly normal. He was the kind of man who could blend in with students at California State University, walking up the library steps like everyone else, his presence almost invisible in the crowd. But beneath the surface, his mind played out fantasies that most couldn't even imagine. As the disappearances piled up, detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together the mystery. In dimly lit offices, evidence maps were pinned to boards, photos connected by red strings, investigators hunched over files with weary eyes. A pattern was emerging, but no one yet knew the monster responsible was the seemingly polite young man who walked among them. At home, his world was far from stable. His relationship with his mother, already toxic from childhood, had grown more volatile. Their arguments filled the small, dimly lit rooms of her house, tension hanging in the air like smoke. To Kemper, her constant criticism and cutting words ignited a rage he could no longer contain. Every confrontation drove him closer to his breaking point, feeding the storm that had been brewing since his childhood isolation. The line between his public facade and his private horrors was thinning rapidly. By day, he was the quiet man blending into society. By night, he was a predator stalking the vulnerable. California's highways and quiet suburbs masked a truth far darker than anyone imagined. This was no longer just a troubled young man, this was a killer living among us, hidden in plain sight, his crimes escalating toward a chilling climax that would shock the entire nation. 1973, the tension that had been building for years finally erupted. Inside his mother's modest home, arguments had become battles of words and rage. The living room, with its dated furniture and dim lighting, became a battlefield where Kemper towered over his mother, his face twisted with anger. Their relationship had always been poisoned by cruelty and contempt, and now it reached its violent conclusion. In the shadows of her bedroom, with a broken lamp casting eerie light, Kemper silenced the voice that had haunted him since childhood. The rage that had been festering for years found its outlet in the most personal of crimes. But in that moment of release came a strange clarity. Edmund Kemper, the man who had eluded suspicion for so long, knew his story was coming to an end. There would be no escape, no more shadows to hide behind. Days later, in a chillingly calm manner, Kemper picked up a rotary phone and dialed the police. On the other end, officers listened in disbelief as he confessed, not just to his mother's murder, but to the series of brutal crimes that had plagued California. His voice, steady and emotionless, described horrors in cold detail. It wasn't guilt that drove him to confess, it was finality. The police, stunned, moved quickly. When they arrived at his home, the truth could no longer be hidden. The man they saw standing before them was not the awkward, quiet loner they remembered, but a killer who had woven himself into society while carrying out unspeakable acts. His arrest marked the end of a reign of terror that had left families grieving and communities in fear. In his mugshot, Edmund Kemper appeared calm, his face blank, eyes unflinching. For many, this photograph would become the haunting symbol of calculated evil, an image of a man who showed no remorse for the lives he had taken. The courtroom became the next stage of his story. Seated at the defense table, his massive frame dwarfed those around him. Lawyers argued, psychiatrists testified, and the public listened in horror as the details of his crimes were revealed. Yet through it all, Kemper remained disturbingly composed, a man who could articulate his thoughts with chilling precision. Psychiatrists studied him closely, scribbling notes, fascinated by the cold intelligence and self-awareness he displayed. He was not the chaotic madman many expected. He was something far more unsettling, a killer who understood exactly what he had done. When the trial concluded, there was only one place left for Edmund Kemper. Behind the iron bars of a California prison, he finally found the captivity that society demanded. The heavy clang of the cell door echoed like a final judgment. In the prison yard, his towering figure walked in isolation, watched carefully by guards, a monster contained at last. And so the story ends with a shadowed silhouette behind bars, the symbol of a man who once moved freely among us but whose darkness could never truly be hidden. Evil may walk beside us unnoticed, but eventually the truth finds its way into the light.